I personally, over the years, I was trained as a rabbi. Afterwards, I was in commerce for many years, and then in later years went back into rabbinical duties. But in recent years, I have been very much involved in trying to spread the message as widely as possible that Judaism and Zionism are two opposing concepts, two diametrically opposed concepts. In the eyes of the world at large, both non-Jewish and now, although it wasn't always the case, but now a large section of the Jewish people seem to have confused the issue and have linked Zionism to Judaism. But really the two are totally different concepts, as I'll try and explain to you briefly. We consider that we have actually we consider it a religious duty to spread this message, and also a religion-based humanitarian duty to spread the message, because the opposition of Judaism to Zionism is really two-pronged. Number one, there are aspects of it which are totally against our basic belief as has been handed down over the generations. And number two, it is totally in opposition to the Jewish religious values, humanitarian values, which are shared by many other peoples, but Jewish religious humanitarian values, because Zionism flies in the face of both of those two aspects. What we're talking about here is Palestine, and one of the aspects of our religion is that the Jewish people, our teaching is the Jewish people were promised to be able to live and spend their lives in the Holy Land, which is known as Palestine, known as the Holy Land. However, it was subject to conditions, and this is the essential point. It was subject to conditions. The conditions were basically, and generally, that we had to maintain certain very high standards, ethical, religious, moral standards. And provided those standards were maintained, we were taught that we would be able to carry on living in the Holy Land. However, we were warned, and this is all within our scriptures, both scriptures and in the oral law, which has also been written down, what is known as the Talmud, you may have heard that possibly, that if these standards are not maintained, then the Jewish people would be sent into exile and would be dispersed around the world. Zionism, as I mentioned earlier, was a secular movement formed by secular Jews who did not accept this divine nature of the exile. It's just part of our. We had the Jewish people had what they called the Golus. Golus means exile. The Golus mentality, and they claimed that we should pull ourselves together and come out of this exile and make a state of our own. And it was eventually chosen Palestine. They didn't even choose Palestine originally, but eventually it was chosen to be Palestine. But this whole idea of forming a state in Palestine flies totally in the face of the teachings that have been handed down to us, and in fact it's heresy, because, as I said earlier, our teaching is that to try and form a state of our own would be a rebellion against the wishes of the Almighty. Now that's from a Jewish religious belief point of view. But then you have the angle of Jewish religious values of humanitarianism, because what Zionism set out to do right from the start, and they made no secret about it in the early writings, the founding members of Zionist movement and later on, they were moving into a country in which there was and is an indigenous population, the Palestinians, who've lived there for centuries, perhaps thousands of years, but certainly centuries, many, many centuries. They were the main indigenous population. There was a small Jewish indigenous population before that as well, but they lived very peacefully alongside, mainly peacefully anyway, alongside the Palestinian people who were there. But anyway, there was an indigenous population, and the aim of Zionism was basically to push them out of the way. I mean, that is recorded in the Zionist writings, to move in and take over and form a country in somebody else's land over the heads of the indigenous population, not coming in and sort of asking whether we can join in with you, but coming in and saying, no, we're going to come in and take over the country. That was the aim of Zionism right from the start. The first Zionist pioneers who started coming in the early 20th century, that was their aim. And prior to that time, Jews and Arabs in Palestine had lived peacefully alongside each other for hundreds of years. And when these new pioneers started to come in fact, I believe, as far as I know, they were not accepted. They were not accepted in a bad way, even by the population, because they thought maybe there would be help develop the country. But as soon as it became apparent that the aim was to form a state for themselves and over the heads of the existing population, that's when alarm bells began to ring, and that's when the conflict started. The aim of the Zionists was to take over and to have total disregard, first of all, for the hopes of self-determination, because prior to that, for hundreds of years, had been under the Ottoman Empire. They were prepared to use whatever force, this is the essential thing, whatever force was necessary to override the wishes of the local population, whether it meant depriving them of their homes, their livelihoods, and their lives. And that has been the picture in Palestine, and that has been, once that started, that set up a conflict, which has been the cause of horrific bloodshed and violence going back 100 years. And violence and bloodshed not only for Palestinians, the main bloodshed was for Palestinians, but violence and bloodshed for the Jewish people as well. Thousands and thousands of Jewish people have also died for this aim, for this nationalistic aim of forming a state in Palestine. And that is disregard to the humanitarian values which the Jewish religion preaches, and also disregard for human life, because they place the value, they place the formation of a state, the idea of the formation of a state, over and above the value of human life. This was obvious because they were prepared to sacrifice human lives for their state, whereas in fact the state as such, in inverted commas, is not worth one human life. But they were prepared to overlook that, and still are, up to the present day. A lot of Orthodox people have become attracted as well to Zionism. You see on everybody knows the so-called settlers are in the West Bank. Many of them are very Orthodox, but they claim falsely, fallaciously, that their approach is taught in the Torah, in the Jewish religion. But this is a falsification. They have it's a mutation of Judaism. It's not the teaching of Judaism that's been handed down to the generations. What has happened is they've been attracted by the nationalistic idea of Zionism, and being religious people, they've given it a religious veneer, and have bolted it onto Judaism. But it's a falsification, and it's a horrific falsification, because it gives the impression to the world that is Judaism. All I know is that we, as Jewish people, over hundreds of years, generally speaking, lived very peacefully in Muslim lands. There were thriving Jewish communities in all the Muslim countries. When there was horrific persecution in Europe, which there has been, it's so hypocritical now when you hear people say, Zionists say, that the Muslims are anti-Semitic. I was going to come to that, because really When you look back, the most horrific anti-Semitism has been in Europe. And when there was severe persecution in Europe, typically places of refuge were in Muslim lands. So the confrontation between Muslim and Jewish people had only came with the advent of Zionism. So what we say is, look, ideally, Zionism shouldn't exist. And Jewish people can live at peace with whatever form of Muslim they happen to be alongside. For the Muslims themselves, as to how they organize their affairs, that's their business. And coming back to Palestine, they have these various peace efforts in order to make peace in Palestine. I don't personally believe, and others, I don't believe there ever will be peace, because you're trying to reconcile two irreconcilable groups. There will never be peace in Palestine as long as the state of Israel exists. And ideally, and this is our prayer, is that there should be a total peaceful dismantling of the state of Israel, to be replaced by a regime in accordance with the aspirations of the Palestinians. Whether this is a secular state or a religious state, it's up to them. It's not for us to say how they make their state, but a state in which is according to their aspirations, and which hopefully Jewish people would be able to live alongside them as subjects of that state, as they have lived for hundreds, thousands of years. But at the moment, that's a dream. It's a pipe dream. You can't see it happening because the Zionists and the Zionist authorities and the Israeli authorities, they're not going to just give up just like that. And what's more, so much of the Western world, this is the other puzzle, so much of the Western world seems to support them. Very strange. You consider that to be one of the puzzles of the 20th century, how they can support a state which is patently undemocratic. They call it the only democratic regime in the Middle East. It's democratic for a certain group, but not really, not truly democratic. So how the Western countries can support it, and they forget, they have such short memories, they forget how it was formed through what they would call terrorism. But they forget that. They just give the Israelis the same legitimacy of existence as the Palestinians, and they try to solve the problem on that basis, if there were two equals.